speak with me. We got to speak in New York a couple times and had some really great conversations about the series. And I was really impressed, not only with what I saw on screen, but with your take on it and what you brought to it.
Thank you.
So it's always wonderful taking on, taking on a new series or show or film as a fan, as a viewer, and finding yourself really pleasantly surprised. And that was the case here. So my first question for you is, how did you get involved, like going way back? How did you get involved with television and film? Were you a child prone to that, or that something that happened later on in life?
I was a child prone to writing, and I certainly was a child who fell in love with television and movies. I mean, the first movie I ever saw in the theater was Return of the Jedi, and so I had a great from that experience, kind of going to those. I still remember going to Raiders of the Lost Ark. I still remember, so there's formative experiences, those formative cinematic experiences. And I did some writing in middle school and high school, but I eventually found my way into playwriting first in college, and then afterward, and got my start as a playwright in Chicago. And that's where I had, a real privilege of writing for extraordinary actors, powerhouse actors. So many great actors of television and film have come from that Chicago theater community. And so the writer, it's really thrilling to write for those actors and actresses. And it was in fact a play that I wrote in a very small Chicago theater, the smallest equity house in the country, like 36 seats, that unexpectedly became a bit of a hit and got me signed by agents, and who encouraged me to, immediately fly out to Los Angeles and pursue television and film. But at that time, I had just gotten into graduate school in Austin, Texas, which is a really fantastic playwriting program. And it was an opportunity to take all that I'd learned in the Chicago theater community and supplement it with what I could potentially learn from really extraordinary playwrights and theater artists in Austin, Texas, who had a completely different aesthetic and had a really sort of ambitious style when it came to storytelling and how you could tell stories in a sort of grand and theatrical way. So that's where I spent the next 3 years, putting off television and film, developing as a playwright and a dramatist. And toward the end of my time in Austin, I wrote a play that in many ways synthesized all the theatrical aesthetics of Chicago and Austin and everywhere in between, and was a piece about a dancer turned football player who's injured on the field. And it was a piece that sort of an emotional character relationship driven piece, but that was told in a grand theatrical style with full contact football hits, real semi-professional football players involved, a modern dance company, a drum line, a kind of presumably impossible to produce play that ended up strangely becoming my most produced play. And it was that play that, to my great fortune, landed on the lap of John Logan, who's a phenomenal screenwriter who wrote Gladiator and Skyfall and The Aviator, but who himself had begun his career as a Chicago storefront playwright, and who was about to enter season 3 of his Showtime series Penny Dreadful, and was looking for a couple writers to bring aboard. And he read this piece that wasn't, on the one hand, had nothing to do with Penny Dreadful and Victorian London and horror, but on the other hand, was populated with ghosts. The football play I mentioned is really structured like a football play between this player post-injury and himself pre-injury. And so there's a literal ghost that's the lead of the show. And I felt like that's what John was doing so beautifully in his series, was exploring a story about what it feels like to be monstrous, what it feels like to be to have demons, and then through the beautiful genre of horror, literalizing those metaphors so that he could explore them to the sort of fullest emotional potential. And I loved his series. I was so honored that he brought myself and another fantastic writer, Christy Wilson Cairns, on board to write with and for him in season 3. And, you know, I really fell in love with writing for television, and I have John to thank for that transition, because he really, you know, when I got onto set in Dublin for Penny Dreadful, and John, unlike any other showrunner, had myself and Christy on set every single day, even though we were just staff writers, told us that he approached this show like he was putting on a play, just one with a much bigger budget. And it sort of framed the entire experience for me and made for this beautiful transition where you could tell stories in a grand and cinematic fashion with all the wonderful resources that television can provide, but where you still, at the end of the day, the aspiration was to write great, emotional, terrifying scenes for great actors.
And it was a pretty gutsy move, though, after you had your first taste of success, to decide to stick with it and continue your education and go that route, because a lot of people jump ship and grab at the first opportunity. You know, what was it about that? What made you choose that, the tougher route?
You know, I had been Texas is this amazing program, and I've been rejected either 2 or 3 times already. So I felt very fortunate to go there. And I felt like I've had a number of incredible mentors. I mentioned John, he's one of them, but along the way, who have reminded me that if you believe this career is a life calling, as it has been for me, then you're not just running a marathon, you're running an ultra marathon. And 3 years in the context of that time period is relatively small, but a really like sacred period of time that you're not going to get again when you're older. Just sort of disappear and use this space as a laboratory. And, you know, as I've discovered with Let the Right One In, and this extraordinary privilege of running a show that is ambitious in its storytelling and ambitious to produce, I have relied upon every single tool that's in my toolbox. So that time that I spent, first the 5 years I spent in Chicago, just kind of as a first grad school, working internships, getting to know that theater community. And then the 3 years I spent in Austin in an official graduate school. Every one of those skills I developed, every one of those tools I put in my toolbox, I've drawn upon in this project. And so I'm really grateful for it. And yeah, I don't know. So I think it was probably it's really a tribute to some mentors who helped me understand that the greatest joy is it comes from like the artistic growth, you know?
Fantastic. So what was it about this series? Well, how did you get involved with the series, and what was it about it, that made you really want to be on board?
Yeah. The candid answer is I was working on another series for Netflix called Away, and we were in the part of the process where you're casting the show, which can take weeks or months. It's a little bit of a delayed process. And I think to keep me from growing restless, some of my reps sent me out on, general meetings, just keep them busy, until the show goes. And I met with the really wonderful folks at Tomorrow Studios, and it really was under the auspices of a general meeting, kind of a meet and greet. And one of the executives there mentioned that they had the rights to Let the Right One In. And the second she said it, I think we were 5 minutes into the meeting, and I just said, yeah, I'm going to stop the meeting here because I want to go home and I want to rewatch it because I adore that film. And if it speaks to me as profoundly as it did when I first saw it, I'd love to tell you why. And she sort of tried to cut me off and say, oh, I mentioned that, but we're not really doing that right now. I said, I totally hear that, but I'm not going to hear anything else you say. I adore that film. And so it's exactly what I did. So ended an hour-long meeting 5 minutes in, went home, rewatched the film. And it spoke to me even more personally and more profoundly. I mean, it's this incredibly poetic horror story and there was one moment in particular when the character of Ellie, after she feeds upon a bystander who's just trying to help, Ellie looks down at this victim and sees the dead body and then doubles over and cries. And it really hit me, and it hit me as an image that felt like an image about addiction. It felt like I was watching a story about so many things, but central among those elements, a creature who's addicted to blood, whose addiction is really not just destroying their life, but the lives of everyone who is around Ellie and trying to protect her. And so I mentioned that to Tomorrow Studios, to Becky Clements and Alyssa Bachner, that for me, that's how the film spoke to me. I mean, it spoke to me in so many ways. And because that was something I was really interested in exploring personally, and specifically the relationship a parent has with a child who's struggling with addiction, that I was interested in creating a series that would try to honor all that was special, singular, and sacred about the film and novel, but that wouldn't try to recreate it. In fact, would reframe the focus from the two children, one of whom's not really a child, to the vampire and caretaker, to the what is the Ellie Hakan relationship in the film and is Eleanor Mark in our movie, and that would reframe it as that caretaker not as a pedophile who is in love with Ellie, but as Eleanor's father, who was trying to care for his daughter and who was clinging to the hope that he might one day be able to give his daughter her life back.
Well, the casting is so important, and it's extremely successful. I mean, I think what they do on screen is magical. How they, at first, the age difference, it makes more sense, as that 10 years has passed, or maybe more than that, I believe, has passed. So there's a bigger gap, but their chemistry just really works, and it's so believable. How early on did you have Demián and Madison cast? Was that before you came on board, or was that after you came on board? And were they always your first choices? Like what did you explore when casting those parts?
It was after I came on board, and
Okay.
They are. It honestly is. It's funny, I'm going back to that time period because it's so hard for me to imagine anyone else playing these roles. And I think, just to say specifically what's so extraordinary about them, and I really appreciate your asking about them, because I could talk about them for the next 10 hours. I'm in awe of them as people, as artists, and the work that they do in this show. The role that both of them play, in a way, is impossibly complex. But for Demián, it has the appearance of an everyman, in that it is fundamentally a story about a father who's trying to take care of and protect his child. But what makes the role so complex and so frankly difficult to play is you have to believe 100% that this character is capable of both the beautiful and monstrous acts that he commits in the name of his daughter. And it is hard to imagine any actor believably possessing the fortitude and strength to do what Mark needs to do to feed his daughter and keep her alive. There are very few actors that could pull that off believably, because this guy has to do this month after month, time after time, and Demián is an absolute powerhouse, and you just simply believe that you could put 1,000 pounds on his shoulders and he would carry it. At the same time, what makes the role special is that somehow, through the darkness of the 10 plus years that they've been enduring this reality, he's managed to keep the flame of humanity and hope alive for his daughter. He's managed to protect, to a certain degree, her childhood, to a certain degree, her innocence, and has not been swallowed by the darkness of their situation. And the way that he can embody both the darkness and the light of that character, and all of the dimensions in between. I often joke that Demián has all 88 keys on the piano. You can play them all. And it's a real privilege to watch him do that. And speaking of that multiplicity, Madison, I mean, oh my God, what's so challenging about the role of Eleanor is that she is neither 12 nor 22. She is a 12-year-old who has been 12 for over 10 years. Right? And that is an extremely complex needle to thread, because you have to be a character that you are simultaneously scared for and scared of. And her ability to embody all that is vulnerable and all that is terrifying about that character is astonishing. To do that at any age is astonishing. To do it at 12 is mind-boggling. The talent that young human possesses is truly awe-inspiring. And to watch her bring it day after day, scene after scene, to start in such an extraordinary place and to simply grow from day one to day two, from episode 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, it's just been it's frankly a privilege to watch.
It's really impressive, and the way she can convey, and both of them on both sides of the coin, because she conveys just what you said, neither 12-year-old nor her years on Earth age. And he conveys that this is my daughter, but yet it's like having a lion in the room with you. You never know, like, one false move and things could change quickly, and pretty much there'll be a finality that you didn't expect with your daughter. So that I just think it's great to watch that happen, and to see that in his eyes and at times, and when he's challenging, he's comes across these challenges of how do I keep this going. At the same time, you can kind of see those moments of doubt, like am I doing the right thing? I'm watching it with my wife, and the family elements of it really hit hard. It's like you don't face these questions or problems, and you don't want to. But you see it, and as you say, with the relationship to addiction, we watched Dope Sick, and that changed our perspective on a lot. And having kids, and it's like, with similar, they're very different but very similar in ways. It's like the way you react and you work with your family and you try to protect, and there's so much more. Like you said, complex. That's the one word about this series that I think really sums it all up. Speaking of which, the series is about people making sacrifices for their family, and then it's literally about making sacrifices for your family. It's so unique. What were some of the goals when you were trying to, like, as you're developing this, to convey in that family? Because it's not just, it's not, there's parallels, or there's two sides to it at all times. There's the vampire, and then there's the drama, the human drama. So what were some of the goals when you're working on and developing this series?
Do you mean goals in general, narrative goals?
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's a broad question, but I mean, it's like you're presented with this story that people are familiar with. You want to bring something new to it, but also, like, I don't know, what do you set challenges up for yourself that you say, hey, this is what I want to accomplish by the end of when I'm done with this series or this season, and then work toward it? Or, like, just kind of like a little bit of the process.
It's a great question. I think one of the goals is, I would say the grandest ambition of the show that makes for a nice tagline, but I mean it with complete sincerity, is to be one of the most terrifying shows on TV and one of the most moving. So to me, if the goal can speak to you and your wife as human beings, as parents, while also delivering a thrilling horror story that captivates in the way that all my favorite horror stories thrill and captivate, that really speaks to the goal. Because I think the enormous privilege of beginning with this source material and adapting from there is that Let the Right One In, both the novel and the film, really offer this incredibly grounded approach to a vampire story, which in its best iterations, again, delivers all the thrills of a vampire story, but doesn't create the safe distance to turn the film off and then be free of it. And that is that would be a grand aspiration, that we're watching it because it is captivating and thrilling and hopefully at times terrifying, and hopefully even on rare occasions funny, but that it stays with you because of what it explores in a more personal, human, relatable way.
So being a vampire film and knowing that the history of vampire films and stories out there, is that a lot of pressure to create something knowing that you kind of have a certain set of some rules and restrictions, but also the history of things, that people will compare it to? So you're always, you're never going to just be able to just tell your story and not think, at least, I mean, I would assume, and not know that there's vampire fans out there who are kind of watching your every move. Does that drive you, or does it?
It's a pressure and a privilege. It really is the very honest answer. I mean, there are moments when you adapt a beloved property like Let the Right One In, where you are invariably going to face scrutiny, and where people are going to ask, what this novel has been made into 2 films. Why are you doing it again? And then at the same time, we'll ask, why are you doing it differently? And I can't, I'd be lying if I said there weren't moments where that doesn't sting a touch. But the truth is, I might be one of those people, as someone who loves vampire movies and novels and loves the film. So I can't begrudge it too much. There is a pressure, but inherent in that pressure is the enormous privilege to be in the company of the original Let the Right One In, of Dracula, of any number of films that have shaped my childhood, from all the way back to Nosferatu, which had an impact, to going to we were talking about the movies we went to growing up, from going to the Lost Boys, from going to Blade in the movie theater, to from the grand tradition of vampire films, and being aware of all of the mythology that is present, making the choices of which rules are going to be part of your world. It's it's like you're part of a club, and you have to prove your place among them, but it's frankly not that different than being part of the Chicago theater community and having to prove that you belong in that place too. So I ultimately consider it an incredible opportunity and a privilege.
When it comes to the rules specifically, it's you get to decide which ones, which established rules you include. Have you created any? You also talking about privilege. Now you have the privilege to tell a vampire story, and you get to tell your vampire story. So have you included anything into it to this point, or do you have plans to, that will add to the mythology that people will say, oh, well, you know, in the Let the Right One In series, they did this, and now that becomes part of, like, you know, written in the book of vampire mythology.
That's a great question. I think that one of the aspects about our vampire mythology that I really get excited about is the way that it straddles the worlds of science and faith. So in the original novel and film, it refers to the creature as being infected. It refers to vampirism as an infection. So when I started to dig in, I started talking to infectious specialists. What would that look like? What would an infection like this look like? How would it manifest? Where would it manifest? How is this plausible? What would it look like? At the same time, the film gets its title from the consequences that are faced when a vampire enters a home without being invited in. And that is a phenomenon that really, unless you want to completely BS your way through things, which we tend not to do in this show, is not grounded in science, right? So that's a contradiction that exists in the novel that is, and the film, that in the space of a, hour 40-minute film, you don't have to really deal with that contradiction. But we see as an opportunity to run full speed at in the way that the world exists for me, as that faith and science can coexist, and certain things can be wholly explained by science and certain things may not be wholly explained by science. So I think that for me, one of the aspects that I love about this show is when you look at most vampire myths that immediately spring to mind, they tend to occupy one space or the other, right? And that goes, even if you open your arms to zombie stories or any story where human beings that were once human have now been rendered monstrous. Did it happen because of science, or did it happen because of something grand and mythological? Well, we're kind of saying yes. And that to me is incredibly exciting. I'm trying to think if there's any particular micro rules within that in season 1. I don't think yet. We've some in the pipeline. But I don't think in terms of any of the micro rules, there's anything that's brand new as of yet. But that larger philosophy, I think, is pretty specific to our show.
It's exciting because, when you're writing, especially genre type, you often have that box. And then when someone breaks through and changes things, like the speaking of zombie films, the Dawn of the Dead, I think it was the remake, that where they started running, which I'm sure maybe there weren't any before that, but that seemed to be the one when you said, wait a second, zombies can run. And suddenly it changes, like, oh wait, now I'm really afraid of zombies, because there's no more just like walk into the house and lock the door. No, it's game over if they're nearby.
Yeah.
So it's like,
and that's the other thing that I'll say. I completely agree. And the other thing that I loved about this source material, and that is a privilege about working on the show, is oftentimes people will, for me in a really reductive way, be like, oh, vampires are just a metaphor for sex, right? And you kind of get the I understand why that comes. It's a very intimate way of infecting someone or attacking them, biting them in the neck. But with Let the Right One In, it complicates that immediately when there are children involved. And so there's a real opportunity to not evade that metaphor, but to refuse the sort of reductive essentialism of it. And so I've found there's just like tremendous freedom. And what comes out of that is, to me, the opportunity to tell something with far greater emotional resonance. When I tend to be less seduced by the vampire stories where people are sort of willingly bending their neck, and where it's eroticized in a way. It tends to feel I don't know, less everything, including less erotic to me. And so to be able to start with source material that was going to look at it in a grounded way, allowed for storytelling that would explore bigger themes about our capacity as humans to prey upon or protect one another, and not be sort of limited to metaphors about sex the way some other vampire stories I feel are.
But talking about emotion, episode 7 is packed with layers and layers of emotion from all different perspectives, and you get to see that infection happen. You get to see, where Eleanor, where the origins of, the origin of her vampire story. But also you see two parents trying to deal with, like, where do we go from here? What are our next steps? We suddenly have new boundaries. You weren't allowed to eat sugary snacks before. Now you're not allowed to drink blood on your own. It's like there's kind of rules you don't typically have to deal with. Plus you involve all the friends. So there's all these intertwining stories that begin. That's your starting point. And I mean, it's I don't want to give away too much, but it's beautiful. It's sad. It's heartbreaking. It's frustrating. There's a car accident where you're like, which is like one of those things that going to films like Run Lola Run, if you've seen that, where a very small moment in time changes your fate. That's what happens here, and it is. You knew something happened as the way it was spoken about. How the family became a family of two. But to watch it all come together is just really incredible. I just want to say, job well done. But also, can you talk about that episode a little bit?
Sure.
In general.
Yeah, I really appreciate those kind words, because that episode is, if I'm being totally candid, of any episode I've written of television for any show, is the most personal to me. So I really appreciate you saying that. And it was the second script I wrote for the series. So I wrote first the pilot, and then I wrote this episode. And Demián and Madison and Kevin Carroll, who plays Zeke, all had that script in addition to the pilot when we filmed the pilot. So they had that history kind of in their bones and in their DNA from the moment they started acting in the show. I also really appreciate you're using the word packed, because it is just on a literal level. Most of our episodes tend to have 40 to 50 what's called strips. So essentially scenes, but if there's a scene that goes from the kitchen to the living room, it's technically 2 strips, right? 2 locations that we're going to film in. So we tend to have 40 to 50 roughly per episode. This one has 80. It is when I first started writing it, I thought, it's going to be a 2-parter. For that reason, it's got about twice as much packed in. And then I realized, that is what's potentially special about it, that you actually kind of like a dish that has a lot of ingredients. It's about reducing down to its emotional essential, and that the thing needs to move with a certain propulsion that is born out of this family's life being turned upside down when Eleanor is infected and racing to try to get a handle on something that is racing out of control. For me, when I was writing it, the image was actually, this is about once she gets infected, which happens quite early in the episode. It's like a wave that is moving across the ocean. And as we go through the episode, it's getting bigger, it's moving faster. And what's really happening is it's collecting a lot of stuff under the surface. All that sediment is collecting, and then we're eventually building to a moment where it crashes. And to your point about the sort of run Lola run analogy, that was a real discovery in terms of that plot point in the episode. But it again was really, I owe a lot to the source material, because one of the things that I always responded to was how seriously they took not just the condition of being a vampire, but the difficulty of caring for a vampire. And I think there's even one moment where the caretaker like slips in the snow. And it was just that realness of, oh, yeah, we're going to even take seriously if you're walking around in the snow with a jug of blood, the toll of that, right? And so a lot of the that philosophy bled in from the moment that I started, where real everyday problems could have profound tragic consequences. And so it really is an episode that is born out of all of those true things. I think it is not only our most emotional episode, but it's actually our most horror forward episode. It's one where you see all of the sort of, it's a true vampire story. But as you mentioned, it's also an origin story for this family. And fundamentally actually a story about a husband and wife. It was a real, I don't know, it was a real privilege to write that one, but even more than that, I just tip my cap to Demián and Madison and Kevin and Fernanda Andrade, who plays Elizabeth. I'm sort of in awe of their performances in that episode.
And when you mentioned it's really about a husband and wife, that gave me the chills thinking about that. Those last few shots and what transpires. It's and like I said, I watch it with my wife, so it's like, it's kind of it's emotional, It's like, if you put yourself in those shoes, it completely changes, how deep it sinks in. I think, at least for us, it really hits hard. And there's a lot of things that have come up to that point. My wife hasn't seen that episode yet, so but she's had a lot of moments where she's like, this is so sad. Like, this is,
yeah.
I told her it's a vampire series,
Yeah.
which is something, it's yeah. When you, as you work your way into it, and I was going to ask you, what do you think of it? What is it to you? Is it a vampire series? If it's one or the other, is it a vampire series or is it a human drama?
Can I be a little bit evasive I'll be happy to answer directly if you want, but I'll be a little bit evasive in so much as my favorite works of horror are the ones that are most difficult to categorize. Right. So is the original, there's an active debate of whether the original Let the Right One In is a horror film or a drama, because I would argue, I guess I land on horror, but it centralizes emotion quite deeply. A film like The Orphanage that is a huge impact on me. How do you categorize that? Get Out. Is Silence of the Lambs a horror or a thriller? Is Seven a horror or a crime drama? These are the works of horror that most speak to me, and that often are the ones that are most difficult to categorize and put into a box. And in my grandest aspiration, I would yearn for the series to be in the company with those works, where people are actually debating that. And I think that episode 7 for me is a great example where I say it's our most emotional episode, and it's also a true horror story. The great contribution, made several, but in terms of the horror and vampire canon that Let the Right One In made, is it really centralizes the Renfield character, right? Like in the film and the novel, the boy is the central character, the caretaker of the vampire. And that is true in our series too. It's the caretaker's the parent, right? It centralizes the parent. Now, what that ultimately does, I hope, is centralizes the emotion, the sort of most primal form of love, a parent's love for their child. at the same time, you are centralizing a Renfield character in a vampire story, right? So that is to me my evasive way of saying, I hope it is both. The metric I use in every one of these episodes is it horror enough? Is it emotional enough? And I'm not sure that we always stick the landing on both those categories in every episode, but it's what we aspire to, and I hope that we have stuck the landing in episode 7 in both.
Oh, and 7, I think all the way through. I purposely stopped. I'm like, I only have 3 episodes left, and I'm like, I don't want it to be over. So I wanted, first of all, I want to watch it with my wife.
They're 3 of my
really
favorites,
coming up.
so I'm excited for you to see 8. I'd be
can't wait.
lying if I didn't say 7 was my absolute favorite, but swiftly behind 7, 8, 9, and 10 are good ones.
Yeah, there's so much going on, and I think your answer is perfect, because in real life doesn't fit in a box. Real life people are complex. Everyone's different. Everyone's a snowflake, and every life story and moments, insignificant moments, can lead to great wins or huge tragedies. And so it's I think the way it's coming across is better. It doesn't feel like a horror. I could recommend this to somebody as a drama, and then they say this is a vampire thing at the same time, but you can just recommend it as a family or as a vampire show, and they would say, oh, I'm surprised, but like my wife, surprised by the amount of emotional connection I have to it.
The truth of for me, the iconic and classic works of horror are that they're deeply emotional. When you mentioned the sadness of the series, the novels Frankenstein and Dracula are two of the saddest novels I've ever read in my life. They'll keep you up at night with bad dreams, but they are profoundly sad and profoundly emotional. But I am really proud that the show seems to be speaking to those who love vampire stories and love the horror genre as I do, but fundamentally it is a show about family. It is a show about a parent's love for their child, a sister's love for her brother, two sort of outsider outcasts love for each other, and so I think it really, I hope it gets put in front of as many folks who would normally say, I'm not watching a vampire show, because I think it will speak to a lot of those people.
A couple more things I want to touch upon and then wrap it up. One, you did touch upon it. There is more. So I've been focusing on Demián and Madison's story, but there's this much larger world that's built, and there's a lot of different themes that are connected in there, and a lot of different personalities. No one's one-dimensional. How difficult is it to expand this and to make it this bigger world, but also to make it feel like you said, it's intertwined. It's not just like, well, let's go to the other chapter or the other part of the world. No, this, like, everything's connected in some shape or form, it seems. Can you just tell me a little bit about that, developing that?
Yeah, absolutely. It is a tricky bit of source material to adapt, because both the novel and particularly the film are perfect in their structure and shape, but they are not structured or scaled to a narrative that would suit a television series, right? Where you're telling 10 hours in the first season with hopefully several seasons to come. There simply is the story is much smaller in the original material. But the themes and the emotion and the ideas that are at the foundation are big enough to sustain an endlessly long story. So it sort of is the perfect material to inspire a completely different story. But if you try to literally adapt the story of the novel or film into a television series, I can't. You would run out of material pretty quickly. But so that was initially a little bit of a challenge, because he had to think, well, is there actually a story here, or what is the story that would sustain it? And a lot of it, though, came from that source material, and came from that idea that's present in the novel and film, that this is an infection. And if it is truly an infection, what does that mean? And if it's an infection, that implies that there is at least the potential of a treatment or even a cure. And so that felt like, oh, this is something that is a larger story that can hold a very long period of time, because it really is working on both the literal level of, I am going to pursue the hope and the possibility that I can give my daughter her life back, and that this is not her affliction forever, while also holding the real sort of metaphorical question that a lot of parents of children who struggle with addiction face, which is, am I ever going to get my child back? And then inside that, narratively, all sorts of stories start to emerge. So if if this is an infection, who is potentially poised to explore and treat it? And also, if Eleanor was infected, who infected her? Who else was infected? What is the larger mythology? Those sort of great questions that invariably come in vampire stories, but in this particular case are also directly pertinent to, I need to know who infected me and who else was infected if I want to try to have a more likely opportunity to be treated or cured. So it's sort of, again, just starting with the source material and then building a story out from there. And what was really exciting about that was, you are then structurally achieving what you're naming, which is not like, oh, there's just this random thing over here, there's this random thing over here, there's this, and we're just going to bounce back and forth. It's that they're all fundamentally interconnected to not just the central relationship between Mark and Eleanor, but the central pursuit of, I'm trying to find a cure for my daughter. Meanwhile, to keep her alive, I'm leaving a trail of bodies and a trail of crimes.
So season 1 has 10 episodes.
Yep.
But I'm sure you have a much bigger vision. Do you have a set number of seasons that you would your goal, like, in order to tell your story the way you want?
I do. It's like, do you put that out into the world and jinx everything? What I will say is that that I have imagined a version of this series that, let's say, this is not being elliptical at all. I was going to say that it sort of spans 50 to 60 chapters. That's my all too honest answer to that question.
Are they written down on those colorful cards back there?
Oh man, now see, I'm in trouble for being. That's actually, you really can't. I'm in so much trouble now, because that is our board for what could potentially be the season opener of season 2. So if anybody
really?
frames and zooms that, they will
No,
see.
If it happens to be something that can be read, I will put a nice blur spot over there.
That would be amazing. Yeah,
people will not understand what I'm talking about, but hey, you know what? That's okay.
I'm so glad you said that, though, because that actually is what that is. Yeah,
that's very cool, though. Like, that's like so inside. It's just, that's why I love these conversations. Not only to hear, but just to get into the world of somebody who gets to be the maestro conducting the orchestra of their series or film.
It's awfully fun. Yeah.
Speaking of music, last question. I'm enjoying the music used. One in particular, episode 1, Little Guns N' Roses. Are you a fan?
I am. Oh yeah, first CD I ever bought was Appetite for Destruction.
Oh really?
Yeah. No, I was a little headbanger when I was a kid. And actually, it's been that song has been written into the end of the first episode since the moment I wrote the first draft of the script.
Really? it felt like that.
Yeah, I was so it was thrilling when people were on board and when we got the rights, and we have incredible our composers Dan and Josue, who've been nominated for Emmys. The music they've composed for the show is absolutely stunning. I love the score for the show. They've composed two absolutely gorgeous themes, one for Mark and Eleanor, one for Eleanor and Isaiah, that end a lot of our episodes. But like you said, we have a couple needle drops, and that was one of them that's been embedded into the DNA of the show from the beginning.
Yeah. As a fan, I mean, I love that moment. My wife, again, I speak about my wife a lot, but this is a family show after all. So,
Yeah.
But when we watch it, she's a fan as well. So it brought new meaning, and it's funny now. It's currently, that's what I'll connect it with, is that moment when he's looking at his daughter, and it's a completely different take on the typical read of those lyrics. So
it's the thing that I'll say in the writers' room a lot is it's a dark show, it's a sad show, but when in doubt, lean into the love. And the reality is that there's a lot of horrific things that Mark has to do for his daughter. There's a lot of horrific qualities to their life, but they also bring each other some joy, and there was I felt like a nice opportunity to, I don't want to say not take ourselves so seriously, but just to remember how much joy and love is coursing through the show to go with the darkness and horror.
I like it. Let's just wrap up with a very simple question. 3 words to describe the series.
Oh, God. So God, 2 of them. I'm the debate I'm having in my mind is, do you go 3 adjectives or do you say a 3-word? You know what I'll say, and it's when we were having our first meeting with Showtime's marketing PR team, I've been in those meetings where images, taglines have been presented, and I sort of cringe and think, wow, I spent several years of my life, and this is where we landed. And when they presented first the image of Mark and Eleanor clinging to each other, but then the tagline, anything for blood, I literally gasped. I just said, and then I took their tagline and used it as the title for the pilot. So I have to tip my cap to them and say that's kind of a spectacular 3-word phrase to capture
it is
the show.
Fantastic. Well, I'm sorry. I do have one more question. Sorry.
Okay.
I lied. Are there any Easter eggs and anything in the series that we could be looking for, that you're planting, being that you're working with the history of vampires and other versions of this story have been out there, or connective versions of this story?
Oh, there's all kinds of Easter eggs. I mean, there are so many, what's interesting. There's so many little moments that are, to me, love letters to the original film and the original novel, that sometimes are conscious and sometimes the result of you write a series having watched the film 50 times and read the novel a dozen times. You don't even realize how much it bleeds in. But, there are these little beats that have to do with, Eleanor scratching to her father inside a trunk that mimics a moment in the original film, these sort of little love letters and nods. And then there are so many moments like that we try to pay tribute to films and novels that inspired us, that inspired me. I believe I'm trying to think one that comes to mind, because I know I have a couple little nods and love letters to Penny Dreadful. And that was my first job. It was a series I loved. I know I'm not giving the greatest answer, because I know there's just like a phrase that gets used once that to me is a little nod to John. There are, without spoiling too much, there are a couple small nods to Frankenstein in episode 8. It's really, it harkens back to your question about the pressure and privilege of being a part of this genre. It's just, there's so much work. I mentioned some of the films earlier that I'm truly in awe of, and within my grandest aspiration, hope to be somewhere in the zip code, to hope to be invited to their party. And I think that that comes through. And then I know Seath there's a shot in episode 3 that's a little nod to The Exorcist. It's in the sewers. It's after the climax. There's just after Naomi does what she does in the sewers, there's a shot that's a little nod to The Exorcist. There's a little bit of a nod to Rosemary's Baby, I think. It's not from me, it's from one of the filmmakers. So, it's not just myself, it's many of the other writers and many of the extraordinary directors of our series who are really proper filmmakers who love this genre and love those films that I mentioned that really traffic between genres. And so I think I think the reason I'm even stalling a bit is I'm trying to give you that really specific, great answer, because there are so many of them. But that's the most honest answer, is that there are so many of them. There's a moment in episode 7 where I'll simply say that Mark and Zeke find themselves in a tight space, and that is a little nod to the film The Descent, which I love. I mean, there's just there's a few different moments happening every episode.
It's just something nice to know, because I think if you watch it then rewatch it after you've taken it all in and get to rewatch it and look at it with a different set of eyes, it's fun to kind of to see those personal connections, those like things that homages to other things in the genre.
There's a beautiful, here's the last one I'll give, let's stick the landing, because I was trying to think of to bring it full circle with the question you asked about how my career began with Penny Dreadful. There's a gorgeous scene that John wrote between the characters of Vanessa Ives and the creature, who Ava Green and Rory Kinnear played, where Vanessa says to the creature, "We have been unhappy long enough." And it was very much in my head and heart during a scene between Mark and Naomi that's in episode 8, when Mark or Naomi says, "I haven't been happy in a long time," and Mark says, "Neither have I," and she says, "I was happy last night," and he says, "So was I." And it's that is a little bit of my version of what John did so beautifully in that show.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your great work on this series. As you can tell, I'm really enjoying it, and I'm hoping to see all that number. Maybe we'll bleep that out, but that set number that you're looking for to
I really appreciate
it.
Thank you, and thank you for chatting about the show. And I really hope that you and your wife enjoy these last chapters. They're fun.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Well, that's the thing. I'm always worried going into each episode. I'm like, oh boy, is this going to be heartbreaking? Am I going to be, because it's a vampire story after all. We try to 4 has got a lot of uplift and joy. 5 is hopefully really thrilling. 6 actually has a lot of joy. 7, 8 is a proper horror. We try to really kind of deliver all the different emotions episode to episode. I'm looking forward for the rest of the ride.
Well, thanks so much. Yep.
Have a great day.